Let me tell you a story. It was 2002. I was a freshman in high school and I was just learning to play Magic. Standard at the time was composed of the Invasion block, which was the first of many times Dominaria faced an apocalyptic event, and the Odyssey block, which was a new beginnings type of block which featured a portion of Dominaria we had never seen before, that being Otaria. These sets basically defined Magic for me. When I got into Magic, these were the sets that were, plastered all over the packs and the websites and whatnot. Now Odyssey had a graveyard theme, as you can see with cards with Threshold. The mechanic is simple. If you have 7 cards in your graveyard, Threshold becomes active and cards with the ability become more powerful. This led to a sort of sub-game within the game of Magic in which a player with Threshold cards is trying to fill their graveyard and their opponent is trying to keep their graveyard at bay, with cards like, Gravestorm, Haunting Echoes, or Morningtide. The concept in a nutshell is fine, right? A necromancer is filling a graveyard for power, and an opposing mage is desperately trying to empty it to deny them that power. And all of this while a normal game of Magic is taking place, in which spells are being cast and creatures are attacking for damage, and so on and so forth. But the problem is, sometimes graveyard decks get a little bit out of control. In this standard metagame, Entomb and Buried Alive were illegal. Now both of these allow you to search for creature cards and put them into your graveyard. And once again, these seem fine in a nutshell. They simply allow you to fill your graveyard in a flavorful way, plus they worked well with the Incarnation cycle. These are cards that grant your creatures an ability if the Incarnation is in your graveyard. So you could cast Buried Alive, grab Wonder, Valor, and Brawn, and essentially give all of your creatures flying, first strike, and trample. So that's pretty cool, right? Nothing wrong with that at all. The problem is the set also had Zombify, which allows you to return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, as well as Cabal Ritual, allowing you to cast Zombify a turn sooner. And what did this deck zombify? Well, there were plenty of options. The original Elder Dragon cycle was legal, for example, as well as Hypnox, an 8/8 with flying that was basically Emrakul before Emrakul existed. There was also Petrodon, which could exile your lands. Remember, this is happening on turn 3 or 4, so exiling 2 of your lands leaves you kind of defenseless in most cases. So this is pretty crazy, right? But it gets even crazier because Rhea Dawnbringer was also legal, a card that could return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield every single turn, meaning that if you cast Buried Alive and get Rhea and 2 other creatures, then zombify her, you'll get the other 2 creatures over the course of a couple turns. Now this blew my mind as a new player. For months, I had been hard casting Scaled Worm and thinking I was pretty badass for having a 7/6 in play. And then someone at my high school built that Rhea Reanimator deck, and I learned pretty quick how crazy graveyard decks could be. While the deck was by no means overpowered at the competitive level, because professional players could hate out the deck pretty hard with their sideboards, at the casual level, at the kitchen table level, at the lunchroom table level in high school, it was basically unstoppable unless you loaded your main deck with Graveyard Hate, and then those cards would be useless against every other deck you played. I remember putting Crypt Creepers in my deck so I could combat the Reanimator deck while still having a card that could be useful against other decks, but it was pretty ineffective. So let's fast forward 17 years. It's currently 2019 and graveyard decks have taken over the modern metagame, with Hogak, Izzet Phoenix, and Dredge decks making up a huge portion of the meta. And even with banning Bridge from Below, a lot of times a modern game comes down to one thing. Can you draw Leyline of the Void? That's it. And you see, that's the problem with graveyard decks. They are so capable of doing such powerful things that games become, can you draw the hate card against it or can you not? I don't want to say that games against Hogak are being decided by a coin flip, but I mean, basically, you either draw Leyline of the Void or you don't. Now let's be clear, there was nothing broken about Threshold or Flashback. There was nothing broken about Incarnation. Even today, there is nothing broken about mechanics like Eternalize or Delve, maybe with the exception of Treasure Cruise, but the point is, there is nothing wrong with using the graveyard to leverage power, and it creates an interesting gameplay mechanic when one player is trying to use the graveyard to gain power and another is trying to keep it empty to deny them that power. The problem with graveyards is they've gone nuclear. There is no better testament to this than Bojuka Bog. When graveyards are so powerful that it needs to be hated out with land cards, and even then it's not good enough to stop graveyard decks from being the best decks in the game, I feel like that's a pretty strong sign that things have gotten out of hand. I mean, think about that. It's a land card. It can wipe out graveyards by itself for free just by playing a land, and despite that, Hogak, Izzet Phoenix, and Dredge decks are dominating Modern. Graveyard decks are no longer about one player trying to build up a graveyard to gain an advantage. Graveyard decks are comboing off and winning within a couple turns, and this has led gameplay to be completely reduced to, well, like I said, kind of a coin flip. Can you draw Leyline of the Void? Because that's what the game becomes if you're matched up against these three Modern decks. And then even if you do draw it, the game's still not good because the player with the Leyline of the Void plays it, and then that's basically the end of the game. Because the graveyard deck also just can't compete when there's a Leyline of the Void in play. Look, here's the point I want to make. Graveyard decks are fine when the graveyard itself isn't the win condition. Cards like Tarmogoyf, Snapcaster Mage, and Gurmag Angler are completely fair cards and are absolutely fun to play with and against. When the graveyard results in power or advantage, it's fine, but when decks can win straight from the graveyard, it starts becoming a problem. And the power level of graveyard decks and graveyard hate has become so high that it actually reduces the complexity of the game. This nuclear arms race, in my opinion, has had a major negative impact on the game, and I feel like we would be in a much better place if the power level on both ends were reduced. Unfortunately, this isn't likely to happen anytime soon, as the way Wizards of the Coast determines whether a change is made is usually based on win percentages, and on the competitive scene, the decks don't quite look as overpowered because it's basically a 50-50 shot whether the ley line gets played. I mean, on paper, it doesn't look that bad. On paper, a Dredge deck might have a 50% win percentage, but in terms of actual gameplay, it's not fun to watch, it's not fun to play with, it's not fun to play against. I mean, you might as well have the players put their decks in their pockets and have them flip a coin, because a lot of times that's how it feels anyway. When I was new to Magic, I knew every time I played against that Rhea Reanimator deck, I was going to lose. There wasn't even any point in playing. And in fact, it did get to the point where I just wouldn't play it. If that 14-year-old kid who had that Rhea Reanimator deck asked me for a game, I would just shrug and not play. Because what was the point? 17 years later, I'm much more capable of playing against a deck like that. But if I draw a hand without a sideboard hate card in it, honestly, it feels just as bad now as it ever did before. It's like I'm that 13-year-old kid again who wants to play Magic, but the only person who's open for a game is that Rhea Reanimator deck, so I decide instead to just not play because, well, who wants to play against that Rhea Reanimator deck? I'm over 30 years old now, but honestly, feeling's just the same as it was before. I get matched up against a Hogak deck and, maybe I draw my sideboard hate card. But if I don't, why bother? So here's the question. Is that healthy for the game? In my opinion, absolutely not. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.